The unexpected mediators, the Nexus station, hung in the void like a jewel of twisted metal and crystal, its massive structure spinning slowly against the backdrop of 3 different colored nebulae. Each nebula marked the territory of one of the galaxy's 3 greatest powers, and today, representatives from all 3 had gathered in the station's central diplomatic hall for what many believed would be the last. Peace talks before total war consumed the known galaxy. The hall itself was a marvel of engineering, a transparent dome that offered a breathtaking view of the cosmos while providing the most secure meeting place in charted space. Crystalline pillars rose from the polished floor, each one inscribed with the peace treaties and accords of 100 worlds. Today, those treaties seemed as fragile as the crystal itself. Prime Minister Zexai of the Corthian Empire sat at the eastern point of the triangular table, his reptilian features carved from what appeared to be living stone. His yellow eyes glowed with barely contained fury as he gestured with clawed hands that could crush steel. The Corthians had built their civilization on conquest and strength, and their warships were legendary throughout the galaxy for their devastating firepower. Across from him, Chancellor Valara of the Alterian Federation maintained her species' characteristic calm, though the silver tendrils that served as her hair flickered with nervous energy. The Alterians were known for their advanced technology and peaceful nature, but centuries of Corthian aggression had finally pushed them to the breaking point. Their defensive capabilities were unmatched, but they had never been conquerors. At the third point sat High Admiral Thokron of the Bruthan Collective, a massive being whose exoskeleton gleamed like polished obsidian. The Bruthans were warriors, born and bred, and their culture celebrated battle above all else. They had remained neutral in the growing conflict between the Corthians and Alterians, but recent events had forced them to choose sides. The argument that filled the hall was as old as their civilizations themselves. Territory, resources, and pride had created a web of grievances that seemed impossible to untangle. For 3 days, they had shouted at each other, made demands, and issued ultimatums. Nothing had changed except the growing certainty that war was inevitable. The Corthian Empire will not yield another parsec of space to Alterian expansion, Zexai snarled, his voice echoing off the crystal dome. Your people have hidden behind your shields long enough. It is time to face the consequences of your greed. Valara's response was measured but firm. The Alterian Federation seeks only to protect the trade routes that have belonged to us for millennia. Your military buildup threatens every peaceful world in this sector. We cannot allow aggression to be rewarded with appeasement. Thokron's laughter was like grinding stone. Both of your peoples speak of peace while building weapons of war. The Bruthan Collective grows tired of your hypocrisy. Perhaps it is time to let strength decide who deserves to survive. The debate continued in circles, each species becoming more entrenched in their positions. The mediator, an ancient being from the neutral consensus worlds, had given up trying to maintain order. 3 great civilizations seemed determined to destroy each other, and nothing could change their minds. Then the main doors to the diplomatic hall opened with a soft whisper of air, and silence fell across the chamber like a blanket. 3 figures walked into the hall with measured steps, their movements synchronized but not military in nature. They wore simple grey uniforms without decoration, and their appearance was unremarkable by galactic standards. They were human, a species that most of the galaxy's major powers considered barely worthy of notice. The lead figure was a woman of medium height with dark hair and intelligent brown eyes. She moved with quiet confidence, scanning the room, not with suspicion but with genuine curiosity. Behind her walked a man whose bearing suggested military training, though he carried no visible weapons. The third was another woman who seemed to be studying everything around her with scientific fascination. Ambassador Sarah Chen had spent most of her adult life preparing for this moment, though she had never expected it to come so soon. The human delegation had been traveling toward Nexus Station for weeks, but their arrival had not been announced. In fact, most of the galaxy didn't even know that humanity had developed faster than light travel, let alone that they had been quietly observing galactic politics for decades. The three alien leaders stared at the newcomers with expressions ranging from confusion to contempt. Humans were known throughout the galaxy as a young species from a small world on the outer rim, notable mainly for their stubborn refusal to accept protection from stronger civilizations. They had been invited to join various alliances over the years, but had always politely declined. Prime Minister HFY was the first to break the silence. What is the meaning of this intrusion? These talks are between the major powers of the galaxy. We have no time for representatives of primitive worlds. Ambassador Chen approached the triangular table slowly, her hands visible and empty. When she spoke, her voice carried clearly through the hall without being raised. We came because someone needs to prevent you from destroying everything that matters. The simplicity of the statement caught everyone off guard. Chancellor Vela leaned forward, her silver tendrils shifting like living mercury. Humanity has no stake in our conflicts. Your world is far from our borders, and your technology is centuries behind ours. What could you possibly offer these negotiations? Chen reached the table, but did not sit in any of the empty chairs that surrounded it. Instead, she remained standing, meeting each alien leader's gaze in turn. We offer perspective. You've been arguing for 3 days about territory and resources and honor, but none of you have mentioned the real reason why this war must not happen. High Admiral Thokran's mandibles clicked with amusement. And what reason would that be, little human? Please enlighten us with your wisdom. Chan's expression remained calm, but there was something in her eyes that made the alien leaders pay attention despite themselves. Because if you go to war with each other, none of you will survive what's coming. The hall fell silent again, but this time the silence was different. There was something in the human's tone that suggested she knew things that they did not, and the certainty in her voice was unsettling. Captain Marcus Rivera, the military man who had accompanied Chen, stepped forward and placed a small device on the table. With a soft chime, it projected a 3-dimensional map of the local galaxy, showing the territories of all 3 major powers as well as the smaller neutral systems. For the past 50 years, Chen continued, while you've been preparing for war with each other, humanity has been watching. We've observed your military build-ups, your diplomatic failures, and your growing hostility. But we've also been watching something else. Dr. Elena Busquets, the third member of the human delegation, touched a control on the device. The galactic map shifted, showing energy readings and gravitational anomalies in the dark space beyond the known territories. 3 years ago, our deep space monitoring stations detected something moving in the void between galaxies. Something massive, something artificial. The alien leaders stared at the display with growing concern. The energy signatures were unlike anything in their databases, and the scale of the objects was almost incomprehensible. We spent 2 years trying to make contact with whatever intelligence built these constructs, Chen said quietly. We succeeded. 6 months ago. They call themselves the Devourers, and they've been crossing the cosmic void for millions of years, consuming civilizations and moving on to the next galaxy. Prime Minister Sci-Fi's claws scraped against the table. This is some kind of deception. If such a threat existed, our long-range sensors would have detected it. Dr. Vasquez shook her head. Your sensors are designed to detect ships and weapons built by civilizations like yourselves. The Devourers use technologies that operate on principles we barely understand. They appear to be able to manipulate dark matter itself. Even if this threat is real, Chancellor Valara said carefully, what does it have to do with our current conflicts? Such beings would be years away from reaching our space. Chun's expression grew grim. 18 months. That's how long we have before the first Devourer constructs reach the outer systems. And they're not coming slowly. They're accelerating. The map shifted again, showing projected paths and timelines. The massive alien constructs would sweep through the galaxy like a tide, consuming everything in their path. But the projection also showed something else. The combined military might of all three major powers, working together, might be enough to mount a defense. High Admiral Thokron studied the data with a warrior's eye for tactical situations. These numbers assume perfect cooperation between our fleets. Such cooperation has never existed. No, Chen agreed. It hasn't. That's why we're here. She walked around the table slowly, addressing each leader in turn. The Korthian Empire has the most powerful offensive weapons in the galaxy. The Alterian Federation has defensive technologies that could protect entire worlds. The Bruthan Collective has tactical expertise that no enemy has ever overcome. Separately, you're all impressive. Together, you might actually survive. And what of humanity? Sci-Fi asked with a sneer. What do you bring to this grand alliance besides warnings and fear? Chen stopped walking and faced him directly. We bring something none of you have ever learned to value. We bring patience. The statement seemed absurd on its face, but Chen continued before anyone could object. For a century, we've watched your civilizations make the same mistakes over and over again. You meet problems with force. You respond to challenges with pride. You choose conflict over cooperation because it feels more satisfying in the moment. Captain Rivera stepped forward, his bearing now clearly military despite his civilian clothes. Humanity spent most of our history making those same mistakes. We fought 2 global wars that nearly destroyed our entire species. We learned, eventually, that survival requires something more than strength or technology or honor. It requires wisdom, Dr. Vasquez added. The wisdom to set aside immediate desires for long-term survival. The wisdom to trust former enemies. When the stakes are high enough. Chen returned to her position at the center of the table. We've been preparing for this conversation for 50 years. Not the one about territory or trade routes or ancient grievances. The conversation about what it will take to save everything we've built. The alien leaders exchanged glances, their hostility toward each other temporarily forgotten in the face of this larger revelation. But old habits died hard, and suspicion crept back into their expressions. Assuming this threat is real, Chancellor, Valara said slowly, what exactly are you proposing? Chun's answer was simple, but it carried the weight of inevitability. An end to this war before it begins. A joint defense pact between all 4 of our civilizations. And a new way of thinking about what it means to be strong. The hall fell, silent once more as the magnitude of what she was suggesting sank in. 3 proud civilizations would have to swallow their pride and work with species they had considered enemies or inferiors. It seemed impossible, but outside the crystal dome, the stars continued to shine, unaware that something vast and hungry was moving through the darkness between galaxies, drawn by the light of their worlds. The price of peace, the silence in the diplomatic hall stretched for long moments as the alien leaders processed what they had been told. The holographic display still showed the projected paths of the Devourer constructs, their massive forms moving inexorably toward the galaxy like a tide of annihilation. But accepting the reality of an external threat was easier than accepting the solution that the humans proposed. Prime Minister HFY was the first to break the silence, his voice filled with the skepticism of a lifetime spent in politics. Even if we accept that this threat exists, you ask the impossible. The Corthian Empire does not ally with those who have shown weakness. The Alterians have hidden behind their shields while the galaxy burned. The Bruthans care only for their own glory. How can such civilizations work together? Ambassador Chen had anticipated this objection. She gestured to Captain Rivera, who activated another function of their holographic projector. The display changed to show detailed analyses of each civilization's military capabilities, but not in the way that military planners usually presented such information. "You're thinking about this wrong," Chen said calmly. "You're still thinking like separate peoples competing for limited resources. But the Devourers aren't coming to conquer, they're coming to consume. There won't be any victory for the survivors, because there won't be any survivors." Dr. Vasquez stepped forward and manipulated the display to show a simulation of Devourer feeding patterns based on their observations of consumed galaxies. These beings don't leave populations to rule or worlds to inhabit. They strip away the energy of living civilizations and move on. Every world they touch becomes a dead rock floating in space. The simulation was horrifying in its clinical precision. Entire star systems went dark as the Devourer constructs passed through them, leaving nothing behind but empty space and cosmic debris. Chancellor Valara studied the data with the analytical mind that had guided the Alterian Federation for decades. "Your projections show them consuming entire civilizations in a matter of days. How is such speed possible?" "They don't fight wars the way we understand them," Chen explained. "They don't need to destroy military forces or conquer territory. They simply drain the life energy from everything they encounter. Our analysis suggests they feed on the bioelectric fields generated by living beings, and they can do it on a planetary scale." High Admiral Thokron's warrior instincts were engaged despite his skepticism. "If they are so powerful, why warn us at all? Why not simply flee to another galaxy and leave us to our fate?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Chen took a moment to consider her answer. When she spoke, her voice carried a conviction that surprised even her human companions. "Because running away is what the last 17 civilizations tried to do. We found the records of their attempts to escape, stored in the quantum wake left by the Devourer constructs. Every species that encountered them tried to flee. Every species failed." She walked to the edge of the crystal dome and looked out at the stars, her reflection ghost-like against the cosmic backdrop. "The Devourers don't just move faster than light. They can track the quantum signatures left by faster-than-light travel. They follow fleeing civilizations across vast distances, consuming them wherever they try to hide." Captain Rivera added grimly, "The only species that ever survived an encounter with them did so by fighting back. But even then, survival rates were less than 3% of the original population." The alien leaders absorbed this information with growing unease. The scope of the threat was almost incomprehensible, but the human presentation was too detailed and too consistent to be fabricated. Dr. Vasquez brought up another display, this one showing a detailed breakdown of what would be required to mount an effective defense. Our analysis indicates that a successful resistance would require the combined resources of at least 4 major civilizations working in perfect coordination. The Corthian Empire's offensive capabilities, the Alterian Federation's defensive technologies, the Bruthan Collective's tactical expertise, and humanity's strategic patience. Strategic patience, Zexia's tone was mocking. What use is patience against an enemy that can drain the life from entire worlds? Chen turned back from the dome with a slight smile. The same use it's been to us for the past 50 years. While you've been building larger weapons and stronger shields, we've been building something different. We've been building understanding. She nodded to her companions, who activated yet another function of their device. This time, the display showed not military hardware or tactical projections, but something far more complex. A 3-dimensional model of devourer technology and biology. We didn't just observe the approaching constructs, Chen continued. We studied them. We learned how they function, how they feed, and most importantly, how they think. The devourers aren't mindless monsters. They're intelligent beings, but their intelligence operates on principles completely alien to carbon-based life. The model rotated slowly, revealing intricate details of the devourer construct's internal structures. They were vast, organic-looking ships that seemed to grow rather than being built, their surfaces covered in structures that resembled both technology and living tissue. They perceive time differently than we do, Dr. Vasquez explained. What seems like rapid consumption to us is actually a careful, methodical process from their perspective. They study each civilization they encounter, learning about their strengths and weaknesses before beginning the feeding process. Chancellor Valara leaned forward with sudden interest. If they study their prey, then they must have predictable patterns that could be exploited. Exactly, Chen said with approval. The Devourers are supremely confident in their abilities because they've never encountered effective resistance. They approach each new galaxy with the same methodical process they've used for millions of years. But that predictability is also their weakness. High Admiral Thokron's tactical mind was fully engaged now. You have a plan. We have the beginning of a plan, Chen corrected. But it requires something that has never existed in this galaxy. True cooperation between species that have spent centuries viewing each other as enemies or competitors. She gestured, and the display changed once more, showing a complex, tactical scenario that involved fleets from all 4 civilizations working in coordinated waves against the approaching devour. The plan has 3 phases, Captain Rivera explained, his military training evident in his precise delivery. First, we use the Alterian Federation's defensive technologies to create mobile shield platforms that can protect entire fleets while they maneuver. Second, we use Bruthan tactical expertise to coordinate attacks that force the Devourers to respond in predictable ways. Third, we use Corthian offensive weapons to exploit the vulnerabilities we create and humanity's role. Prime Minister, Zexai asked. We coordinate everything, Chen said simply. We've been studying all of your civilizations for decades. We understand your strengths, your weaknesses, and your cultural blind spots. More importantly, we understand how to help. You work together despite your differences. The alien leaders exchanged glances. Their ancient rivalries temporarily set aside, as they contemplated the magnitude of what was being proposed. But old habits died hard, and suspicion crept back into their expressions. "This is assuming a great deal," Chancellor Veliara said carefully. "You ask us to trust not only each other, but also a species that has remained hidden from galactic affairs for centuries. How do we know this isn't some elaborate deception designed to make us lower our defenses?" Chen had expected this question. As well, she reached into her uniform and withdrew a small crystalline device, placing it on the table where all could see it. "This contains the complete records of our observations, our analysis, and our projections. Everything we know about the Devirers, everything we've learned about your civilizations, and everything we believe will be required to survive what's coming. You can verify every piece of data independently." She paused, meeting each alien leader's gaze in turn. "But you should know that by sharing this information, we're committing ourselves to this course of action. If you choose to ignore our warnings, humanity will still fight the Devourers when they arrive. We'll do it alone if we have to, because that's what survival requires." The conviction in her voice was unmistakable, and it gave weight to everything else she had said. Here was a species willing to stand against an overwhelming enemy, not for conquest or glory, but simply because it was necessary. "Hi," Admiral Thokron reached for the crystal device, studying its intricate structure. "You would share your tactical advantages with potential enemies." "You're not our enemies," Dr. Vasquez said firmly. "You're our neighbors, and neighbors help each other when the house is burning down." Prime Minister Zexhai's laugh was harsh, but not entirely without warmth. Such sentiment might have value if we believed that neighbors could trust each other. The Corthian Empire has learned to rely only on strength. "Then learn something new," Chen challenged, "because strength alone won't be enough. The Devourers have consumed civilizations far stronger than any of ours. They've faced technologies more advanced than anything in this galaxy. Strength didn't save those civilizations, but cooperation might save us." Chancellor Valira had been quietly analyzing the tactical projections while the others talked. Now she looked up with a troubled expression. "Your plan requires not just cooperation, but perfect coordination. The timing windows you show are measured in minutes. A single mistake by any fleet could doom the entire defense." "Yes," Chen agreed. "It will be the most complex military operation ever attempted. It will require trust between former enemies, coordination between different tactical philosophies, and perfect execution under the most stressful conditions imaginable." She walked back to the center of the table, her voice growing stronger. "But the alternative is extinction. Not defeat, not conquest, not subjugation. Complete extinction of every living thing in this galaxy." The hall fell silent once more as the weight of the choice before them became clear. Outside the crystal dome, the stars continued their ancient dance, unaware that their fate hung in the balance of this single conversation. Finally, Chancellor Velera spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "If we agree to this alliance, if we commit our civilizations to this desperate gamble, what guarantee do we have that it will work?" Chun's answer was simple and honest. "None. We're asking you to bet everything on a plan that has never been tested, created by a species you barely know, against an enemy that has never been defeated." She paused, letting the brutal honesty of the statement sink in. "But we're also offering you the only chance any of us have to see tomorrow." The alien leaders looked at each other across the triangular table, their ancient rivalries suddenly seeming petty in the face of cosmic annihilation. The decision they made in the next few minutes would determine not just the fate of their civilizations, but the fate of every living thing in the galaxy. The vote, when it came, was unanimous. Not because they trusted each other, but because they trusted the small, patient species that had quietly watched and learned and prepared for this moment. As the formal agreements were signed and the new alliance was born, Ambassador Sarah Chen looked out at the stars and allowed herself a moment of hope. The real work was just beginning, but for the first time in 50 years, the galaxy had a chance. In the darkness between the stars, vast shapes continued their inexorable approach, unaware that their next meal had learned to work together.